Thanks for joining us today in episode 2 of A Day in the Life of a Pen Tester. Today I have three very special guests on, Jack, Mark Clayton, and Dory Clark. And we'll start with our introductions. Dory, can you introduce yourself and tell our listeners about you?
Sure. My name is Dory, and I'm an applications focused penetration tester. And I work for just a large retail company, and I'm really interested in some of the concepts surrounding just external footprinting and predictive analysis with data science type of stuff, and how we can apply that to do some of those things more effectively. So that's one of my kind of research areas of hobby. I've been in the industry maybe about 10 years doing security testing, and I kind of started off in more of an audit role and then have moved more and more technical and applications focused as I progressed to where I'm at now.
Thanks. Jack, how about you next? Can you tell our listeners about yourself?
Sure. My name is Jack Hyde. I used to be a contract penetration tester, mainly focusing in physical security and social engineering. And now I am a red team for I'm a red teamer for an internal red team for another large multinational corporation. And I still focus mainly on physical and social, but I'm slowly moving into more of the technical realm of penetration testing.
That's great. So give you a little more skills, things to do once you get past the security controls and into the...
I become lead hacksaw.
Oh, cool. And last but not least, Mark, can you give people a little info about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Mark Clayton. I go by Bullseye on Twitter, and I am a penetration tester and red teamer for a company called OccamSec. And so I've been with that company since I was like 20 years old. And so pretty much my entire career stems from within that organization. I took a year off to do some work at a really large organization to where I made a big transition from like penetration testing and red teaming to more of like AppSec and DevSecOps and stuff like that. And so that's kind of shifted my focus. And so now I'm back at OccamSec, back home and happy. And so in terms of like specialities, I'd have to say that like AppSec is my specialty, and like my future research is definitely in the DevSecOps area.
Thanks. Next, we're just going to kind of dive a little deeper in. You've kind of discussed your backgrounds briefly. Why don't we go into your area of expertise, some of the areas that you are experienced in, and let's start with you, Dory.
Okay, so I am by far very specialized in application security right now. Don't really touch the red teaming side, so that occasionally leads me like further into some, I'll say, the more mild depths of reverse engineering and just really understanding on a technical level how things work. I also work right now on a proactive team. So we go out within the company where I work and we pick specific targets. So that's really led me into a heavy focus on what's exposed, what kind of traffic, and what kind of automation we can apply to those systems to help us identify the best use of our time. At the organization I work, we're tracking over 15,000 different potential external only targets. And with a small team, we want to accomplish the most important things with that time. So I'm constantly looking at ways that we can script, automate, discover, and collect data to find ways to do that, in addition to performing the application penetration testing and reverse engineering work.
Just one quick note. I remember you'd mentioned something. Have you worked with bug bounties, or do you work doing bug bounties yourself?
Absolutely. So we also have a bug bounty team, and the group I work with kind of works hand in hand, because a lot of times if a lot of bug bounties show up, then that's an excellent target. And we'll also work with them. I was, in fact, just doing that this morning when they received a ticket over the weekend to identify an issue, and we were trying to figure out where else could we possibly have this issue. So developing some scripting to go out and look for this very specific issue that just got turned in throughout the variety of our enterprise. So we are very closely working together all the time.
That's good. Thanks for sharing that. And Jack.
Sure. So my area of expertise, again, is more on the social engineering, physical security, covert entry side of things. And I am a part of a larger red team. It's slightly different than a penetration testing team. My group is made up of between 8 and 12, mostly technical penetration testers, so network, web app, all of the above, focused technical penetration testers, and I am the physical component of the red team. So when we've been battering at the cyber gates, if you will, for a while, and we still haven't found a way in. Sometimes physical breach is the best way to get technical access to a company's assets. And so I'll go in and plant a rogue device, or I'll plug in a ducky to somebody's, or a malicious USB to somebody's unlocked and unattended computer. So I pretend to be the bad guy and go after those companies' technical assets. And I hand that access off to my team, who are then able to hack deeper into the network.
Oh, very cool. Since you mentioned red teaming, I know a lot of people, there's a lot of misunderstanding of the term red team. Could you explain for our listeners what a red team or what red teaming is?
Sure. So every company, every large company essentially is going to have a defensive team, and that team is called the blue team in a lot of these organizations. And they are the watchers on the wall. They're the ones who are going to be making sure that the company's network and technical assets are safe. And in order to sharpen that blue team, a lot of organizations have red teams, or there are contracting red teams who will pretend to be malicious attackers who come at the network as if they have no idea about anything that's going on internally. And they say, okay, let's see if we can hack into this company. What sort of damage could we do? But instead of then turning around and selling that, maybe we're going after credit card information or employee personal information. Maybe we're trying to see if we could gain access to the website and deface it. We're going after all of those little details, and instead of turning around and using it maliciously against the company, we will give it back to the blue team and say, okay, this is the access we got. How can we fix it? And then we patch all of those vulnerabilities and then try to hack into the company again. So we are the practice enemy of the defense.
Well, thanks for the clarification. I know a lot of times people get confused with, which sometimes pen testing can be considered red team, but it's not, I guess, in its purest form, red team. But a lot of times people get confused. So I think it's good that the audience knows that red teaming goes past just a penetration test. Although when you group blue team and red team, it kind of falls, red team's more offensive security, but sometimes I think people don't realize that it's more of an adversarial approach than just.
It is, absolutely. It's offensive security, but we are only here to help the good guys.
Thanks. And a lot of times this is unplanned, correct? The blue
That
team.
is correct. In many larger organizations, the blue team kind of knows, okay, we're doing a penetration test of this particular application. Let's see what the logs look like on your end. And in my organization anyway, the red team campaigns are completely unannounced on the defensive side. So we're, as a red team, we're chatting behind the scenes. We say, okay, now we're going to go after the company in this direction. And in that way, we are able to see what the blue team's reaction is going to be, not knowing if it's the red team or if it's an actual adversary.
Yeah, very cool.
I think so.
And Mark, how about you? Why don't you go in a little more detail about your expertise?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned that before. So my expertise is application security, right? And so I guess like the reason being is like I do a lot of development. And so I guess one thing I always tell a lot of people is like a lot of really good penetration testers or a lot of really good red teamers, right? Their expertise can be defined by like their previous role, right? Like if you're a sysadmin or network admin, right? You're going to be really good when it comes to offensive internal Active Directory testing, right? And so for me, I'm like a developer by heart, right? I'm a big like front-end developer and cloud architecture and like Jamstack for the guys. I don't know if there's any developers who are going to listen to this, but for the guys who know what Jamstack is, super big in a full stack and front end dev. And so that lends itself very well into application security, right? And so it's like when I'm testing, right, I'm not just testing like, oh, let's see what the attack surface looks like. I'm actually thinking like, how would I build this, right? And trying to get a guess of like, how would this structure be developed? And, you know, you can kind of get a more of a, like a back end feel, right? In terms of the infrastructure. And so I've kind of stayed in that niche, right? And so when it comes to like red teaming and penetration testing, right? I guess it was like good to note for like, for different red teams, right? You usually want to have a team of a variety of different skill sets. And so for my red team, I'm the AppSec guy, right? So we've got guys who do reverse engineering and guys who do a lot of like internal Active Directory testing. And like basically if I pop shell from a web application, I'm usually just going to hand the shell off, right? And let people who are more focused in that area continue to do the additional triaging. And so me, I've kind of stayed in my lane, AppSec, cloud, you know, all the OWASP stuff. That's kind of my realm of existence.
Cool. Very cool. Thanks for sharing that. You guys bring up some really good topics, because one of the things people don't think about nowadays as endpoint protection, IPS, just some of the DLP products, antivirus, network security products, firewalls block a lot of these attacks, that sometimes you're left to getting in through physical, as Jack mentioned, social engineering, or even like Dory and you mentioned, Mark, you know, the web application. A lot of times these systems are so hardened, but sometimes there's like default credentials on the framework, like Apache Tomcat or something, allows people to get in that otherwise you wouldn't be able to with these weaknesses. So these are really good areas for people out there to focus on. So do you think, Mark, do you recommend for someone as a generalist, as a pen tester, what kind of coding do you recommend them, or development would be helpful to someone pretty immediately as a pen tester?
Yes, I would say like just starting off, right? So I would say Python for sure, right? Python, and I guess you could say Ruby, right? So just generalist, I'm getting into penetration testing and I'm looking to dive deep into something else, right? Python will give you all of your scripting capabilities, and also Python lends itself to like, you can do REST API development and web development and machine learning stuff, right? And so I always recommend Python as the first language, right? And as you start to like, say you start to gravitate towards reverse engineering and things like that, yeah, you're gonna have to learn like the constructs of C, and then you're gonna have to learn like a high level assembly or normal assembly, and like the different languages that you focus on, you'll start to gravitate, basically, as you start to gravitate towards different areas of technology, right? The language that's like the underlying component, that's what you initially focus on. For the generalist, Python will take you really far, especially for someone with no previous experience in development.
What about like someone that's a web application pen tester? What would you recommend to them?
Yeah, so for web app, right, everybody generally starts off with PHP, right? I think that's because a lot of the training and a lot of the like tutorials and walkthroughs you go through, like usually start off with PHP. And that's because like a lot of the materials that we have that's in circulation right now kind of piggybacks off of the fact that PHP was the dominant web application language, right? Nowadays, I would say that it's helpful to understand PHP at like a high level. It's more so better to understand like the actual business logic that the vulnerabilities discuss, right? And so my personal recommendation, I'm really big into like bleeding edge development. And so I would highly recommend, if you're like a new developer starting off, right, and you're looking to like stay on the bleeding edge of things, I would say Node.js and JavaScript, because that's right now my belief, that's the way, that's where everybody's going. And so if you can understand Node.js and understand JavaScript, right, and that puts you in a position to really understand like a lot of REST APIs and single page applications and things like microservices and stuff like that. You'll see a ton of Node.js. And so that's my recommendation. I don't know how mainstream that is yet, but PHP is kind of the old, and Node.js is definitely the new-ish.
Thanks for sharing that. That's some great insight. Dory, do you have anything to add after we've heard Jack and Mark uh, give some of their comments. Do you have anything to add to any of that?
I think I overlap a little bit in the AppSec area. I think that they kind of covered a lot of the main points that I would have made as well, pretty well with their description.
Okay, I just want to make sure nothing, kind of sparked your creative thoughts there, and didn't want to pass you up on anything. So
No worries.
it's a great conversation so far. Let's see. We'll start with you this time, Dory. What's your definition of a pen test?
Okay, so I'm not a red teamer, so I'm coming into it from the perspective of a pen test I would do. And to me, a pen test is you take your target or target space and you try everything. You're not just looking for one way, you're looking for all the problems that exist with that particular device. And to me, a pen test is targeted towards the build, how everything's build and configuration, as opposed to necessarily being targeted at a defense, such as a red teaming campaign where you might be trying to test those defenses. To me, a pen test is a very, very focused effort to try every single thing in your arsenal and discover anything wrong with anything in that source code or configuration of everything within your target space. I think the SANS definition is to say you're kind of like a pirate and you're just in there swinging everywhere you go, as opposed to the ninja approach. So
that would be the SANS definition.
Yes. So to me, a pen test is the everything. You don't walk out of there with one flaw or misconfiguration. You walk out with every single thing you could possibly find.
Great definition. So Jack, what's your definition?
So from a physical perspective, things are definitely different between a pen test and what I'm doing now, which is red teaming. As a physical pen tester, it was not very different than what Dory was talking about with the, excuse me, with the application penetration testing. It was looking at a building, looking at the people who worked there, and locating all the entrances, locating all of the what you supposed might be social weaknesses. And of course, I'm not going to necessarily attack the people over and over again to find all of their the vulnerabilities that might end up in physical access, but I might try one or two different approaches from the social angle, but then looking at all the different entrances to the building, trying all, several different attacks to see what might gain me access to the inside, to the crown jewels, and what might, how do I put this? How loud do I have to be? How ridiculous do I have to be before somebody looks at what I'm doing and saying, that doesn't look right, that looks kind of suspicious, and kind of raises the red flags, raises the alarms. Whereas right now in the red teaming, I'm kind of more a means to an end. I can't be as creative, but I definitely am able to go straight for the heart of what I am aiming for. I find the weakest link, I take advantage of it, I go straight for what I'm going for, and I get out. Otherwise, if I get caught inside, my team is not going to have the access that they sent me in for. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, great insight. I just like to get people's different definitions because everyone's definition is going to vary. And I know everyone on this webinar has a true idea of a pen test. Some people think it's running a vulnerability scan and put it.
Yeah, well, you've got three very, very different perspectives here. So I'm interested.
That was pretty much the focus of this webinar, is because we're not just taking people that are pen testers, we're taking people that have some interesting specialties like red teaming, social and physical, web app and all this. So I think this could be really helpful for everyone listening to get a better idea of the different ideas of a pen test and get more of an idea of what a real pen test is. So Mark, what is your definition?
Yeah. So my definition is kind of like a combination of what both Jack and Dory said. And so for me, like penetration testing is basically finding as many vulnerabilities as you can, right? And all points of exploitation, as much stuff as you can scrum up within a allotted time frame, right? So it's like, here's 2 weeks, go break everything, right? Now, a vulnerability assessment may fit within the realms of a penetration test, right? And as you do your pen test, you'll kick off a vulnerability assessment, detect the findings that were, or not detect, I'm sorry, validate the findings that were determined from the vulnerability assessment. And then that's not the end, right? You could do a vulnerability assessment in the very beginning, right? And then that part's out of the way. Validate those and you're good to go. And then the actual pen test kicks off, right? So it's almost like a junior senior type thing, right? Penetration testing could be considered as vulnerability assessment plus a whole lot more, right? And so penetration testing is find as much stuff as you can within a time frame, right? Red teaming, I don't know if we're really doing comparisons between the two, but I'll jump into it. But red teaming is different, right? Red teaming, like Jack said, your goal is to test the capabilities of the blue team, right? And not only that, red teaming is it's objective based, right? So you define the objective. Today we're going after X. Today we're trying to see the blue team's capability to respond to X, right? We're going after this data. And so red teaming, you start to move, like, in my mind, I go from like a SWAT team to like the Voltron or Transformers, like it's a team that's going after, that's the way I see it, right? The way I see it is like, or Power Rangers, right? Like you move up to Power Rangers, Black Ranger go, White Ranger. That's the way I see it. And so you go after the objective. And so when someone
like this analogy.
You like it? Yep. So that's the way I see it, right? So it's like when someone says, I'm a red teamer, but you do penetration tests, that's different. You also can't be a red teamer, right, if it's just you on site, right? I mean, not on site, but like if it's just you doing the gig, you move as a team, right? And you accomplish the objective. Penetration testing is that's fun, right? You go through, break everything you can, and then once the time is up, you say, here's all the stuff we broke, and here's how to remediate. And so that's the way that I see where all three of these fit in their individual buckets.
Yeah, great definitions. I really like those. And here you mentioned the team part. That's very interesting because, using the red teaming method is you're going to more accurately emulate what adversaries do, because a lot of stuff that's either organized crime or nation state, it's not just going to be one guy. So that's really
exactly. Yeah, because like you hear like you've got a combination of like threat modeling, right? And then you've got APT emulation, right? And so it's like I feel like I said emulation, but you're supposed to replicate an APT, and like there is no APT that's just one person, right? Like it's a team of people, and so you can't say you're a red teamer unless you have the rest of the Power Rangers or the rest of the Voltron group.
I love this so much. I'm taking it back to my team.
So great. That's a very good analogy. I like that as well.
We are Power Rangers.
Okay. Let's see. What should be tested in a pen test? Dory.
Well, that's going to be depending on the organizational goals and how it fits into your threat modeling. I think it'd be very different for every organization. But when it comes to a test that I might receive myself with the area that I'm in, let's just say that, I work in retail. So you're dealing with people's data. You're dealing with things you might interact with in a retail store. So when it comes to looking at a particular device, the answer is everything, because, all the code should be decompiled. You should go walk through all of it. You should know what every bit of that does. You should know what every single service does, how it works. You should test for vulnerabilities in every single service, every single exposed interface, because when it comes to the trust that a retailer would have with their customers, one vulnerability going by is too many. That being said, that would be the goal of testing just that. When you come to a much higher organizational model, I think our red teamers are probably weigh in a lot more, because by the time you get down to my single piece of test, you're assuming that all those other organizational controls have already been tested by a different responsible party.
Good. Jack, what about from a red teamer's perspective?
Yeah, I think what Dory said was a very good explanation of what should be tested in a penetration test. She really gets down into the nuts and bolts of the application itself, whereas the red team wants to find the quickest, easiest route between the outside and what our target is, what our objective is for this particular campaign. So we're going to take advantage of the weak links. We want um, the path of least resistance. So we're definitely not going to dig down into the weeds of the code. We're not there. We're not throwing all of our expertise at a particular application. We're going to try one thing, two things, three things, and eventually something's going to work, and then we're in, and then we escalate from there. From a physical perspective, that means I'm not testing every single lock on a building. I am going to social engineer my way by talking to one single person. I'm going to find the weakest entrance from a security perspective, and I'm going to take advantage of weak door fitting there, or maybe there's a bad hardware, or a badge cloning, or a badge system that's easy for me to clone. And so I will take that path of least resistance in order to get inside. So we don't have the bird's eye view they do. Um, we're definitely not as granular.
Cool, and great insight into the red teaming point of view. Mark, why don't you give us your point of view?
Yeah, for sure. So my definition, right, of penetration testing is basically I want to see where an attacker sits. Basically, I want to kind of replicate where an attacker sits on my castle, right? So my analogy here is basically if I've got a castle, right, I want to see where the penetration tester, what is his viewpoint externally? I want to see what is his viewpoint internally on the domain, right, and off the domain, right? Like if Jack breaks into a building, right, and she plugs in her laptop and she's got access to the internal network, but she's not on the domain, right? That's a scenario, I guess you could kind of say it's kind of on the lines of red teaming, but the scenario that I'm trying to replicate is where does the penetration tester, like if the penetration tester is not on the domain, but internally, I want to see what all can be done within the allotted time frame. And so the way that I see penetration testing is if you've got a castle, right, put the penetration testing team in different postures, like put them outside of the castle, put them inside the castle, make them authenticated on the domain, and then you start replicating what happens if you have a malicious insider, right? Let's say one of my employees went rogue, right? That's the scenario, quote unquote, that you're trying to like replicate, right? I want to see what happens with 2 weeks of a malicious insider, right? And so I guess just to conclude, that's the way that I see it. It's just, I visualize a castle and it's up to you to figure out where you want to put us. And then we'll tell you what your actual attack surface looks like.
Yeah, and that's actually a really interesting point you make, because that was how things were done when I was a contractor physical penetration tester. I would gain access, I would plug a rogue device in, or plug in my Ethernet and be on the internal network. And then from there, I would have an internal penetration tester take over, and he or she would escalate from there, and we kind of hand it off to each other in that way. So I think that's really interesting. And another thing you mentioned was the 2-week time frame. I don't know if that drives you crazy. It kind of drives me a little batty.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Jay, go ahead.
No, it's all right. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, like I was on a gig 2 weeks ago where it's like right before I was about to start trying to cross over from the from non-domain onto the Active Directory environment. I already had all of their like intellectual property, but like my time was up, right? And so it's like, yes, there's much more we could do, but like that's it. You know, you've given us 2 weeks. This was a statement of work, and so it's like, this is what we found within.
Oh man, that stinks. Yeah, before, when I was hired on to do physicals, I would have between 3 days to a week to do a physical. And if I'm being honest, like, I'm not an actual attacker. And if I was like legitimately worried about getting caught and I really felt the need to get inside this building for malicious reasons, I'm going to watch this place for weeks or months. I'm not going to take 2 or 3 days to do research and craft a plan of attack and then try to find my way inside. It's going to be a much longer process, but typically companies don't have the funds for that kind of planning and attack, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, if I could just like add one thing, I think you hit like a really, really good point, right? And so like there are times to where we have to drive home like the impact, and it's, you know, we were able to find this and this is what we were to do with it. But in a real world scenario, yeah, man, it would take, give me weeks, give me time, and this is what could have happened, right? And I think that's a very common conversation that you see a lot of penetration testers and red teamers, well, not red teamers, but a lot of penetration testers add, right? It's like, you know, this could have been way worse, but we're in a time crunch. Or you feel rushed and stuff like that. So yeah, the time crunch is always kind of sticky to deal with on the testing side.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an emotional connection to that rush as well, at least from a physical, social perspective. You want to get the job done and you want to do it well. And I think that leads some people to make rash decisions and maybe take things faster than they should.
Great insight there. Great conversation. What often gets overlooked? I mean, there's some areas sometimes people forget. So I just want to get your insight of what you think gets overlooked that should be included. Dory, what are your thoughts?
Well, from like Sophie was talking a bit about the consulting perspective, and I have seen a lot where certain organizations will define something so narrowly. Like, for example, we know there's a problem with server X, so pen test our network, but don't touch server X. And sometimes those things that you see in the consulting side is bad. What I see going on a lot, and I read like a lot of the bug bounty reports from a lot of companies every day just to kind of see techniques, is I think that people overlook a lot of what their network is on the internet. You see all the time, like when you read through just different people's narratives, on the internet, just reading random blogs and, hey, this company forgot about this site, or the ephemeral domains where people are putting things up, taking them down. So I think that's something that gets overlooked, is just what's out there. And what I maybe see also, sometimes reading like, I did more consulting and past reports, people just maybe don't go quite deep enough. Like, I know in the type of work that I'm in, there's a lot of value in just really understanding and taking the time to sit down and understand how all these parts work and interact with each other, and how every service is formatted to really understand all of the opportunities to attack. And sometimes people may just see a compiled file there, or, assembled file, and think, well, I don't know what's running, so I'm just going to move on and leave that behind. And so I think sometimes that's another kind of missed opportunity to really understand and exploit different things in different ways.
Great stuff. Jack, what are the oversights that you see?
So I think that in general, in the past, physical security has been largely overlooked. You see companies taking great efforts to make sure that their networks are secured from the outside and their websites are secured, etc. But then they don't take the time to consider, okay, well, what happens if a malicious actor gets into our building? Or what happens if one of our insiders suddenly turns on us? Do we have protections in place for keeping out the bad guys, and not just from our physical buildings, but from our networks as well? Are they able to escalate if they do get inside of the building? Are they able to escalate their network access and their domain access from the inside of the building? Do we have a NAC in place? And I'm not the expert on protecting networks, but I know there are a lot of updates that could be done that can help protect the company from the inside of the building, from malicious insiders and from malicious outsiders.
Great information. That's one area that I agree that's often overlooked. In my consulting days, when we were doing pen tests, we would go over, and if they hadn't had a physical pen test done or social engineering, we would recommend that, or you saw some glaring things that should be addressed that need to be tested.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that in relation to that, the social engineering training could probably be kicked up a notch. I think a lot of companies make it pretty boring, like don't click links from people you don't know and make sure everybody has a badge. And I think that you can make that training a lot more engaging if you bring in people who have done this in the past, who can say like, look, I break into buildings, or I have broken into buildings in the past, and this is how I did it, and this is how you can protect your company from doing that. So I think that adding that element to the training would make it a lot more engaging and help involve your employees in helping to protect the company.
Yeah, I like those ideas on the education. Definitely needed. And like you said, most of the time it's usually kind of boring. They don't really go into enough detail. I mean, most cases you get training on phishing and don't let people tailgate, and very limited. So those were some really great points and some things for people to consider. So Mark, what do you think is often overlooked during pen tests?
Yeah, so I think Jack actually hit like a really big point, right? And like I do think that people definitely, well, I've got my own point, but I just wanted to add something to that, right? So I think people definitely do overlook the physical and the social aspect of it. And honestly, I think it's maybe it's because you're dealing with like the human element, right? Like if you come in and you break my server, right? Well, I can patch my server, you know, but you can't just patch a human. You can't just say, hey, person X, right? From this day forward, since we put this update on you, you're no longer going to click on links, or you're now going to have full awareness of social engineering, right? And so I mean, I don't think that I'm in a position to really say why. I think people are kind of afraid of that, or timid, or are more or less prone to that. But, you know, I mean, you're showing up on their turf in person, and you're not just tearing up the systems. You're going after the physical building. You're talking about, yeah, Jack, the threats that you emulate, I think, hit a lot closer to home than just a server having some like RCE on it, right? It's like my front desk lady will give a badge to anybody who is nice. And I think that's something that's very terrifying. And so I just wanted to add a note to that. Like that's really big. The one thing that I would add, just my own personal opinion, is I do a lot of web application assessments, like I've said throughout this, but I think that a lot of people forget to take into consideration the context, right? And like the business use case behind the stuff that they're exploiting, right? We get so trained to just look at things from a technological perspective. And it's like I said, I always go back to web application, but it's like I go in, I assess all the user routes, what's the authentication looking like, what's the session management. And so I'm finding all these technical, really cool OWASP level bugs and different intricacies. And I'm looking at the entropy in the session token. I'm doing all this stuff. But let's say that any user can submit a form that does really bad X, right? And it's unauthorized, right? Understanding the purpose of the application and understanding the purpose of the environment, right? That allows you to really drive home some like really weird vulnerabilities. That's not like, hey, this isn't really a system vulnerability or like an architectural and application vulnerability. Fundamentally, the way that the application or way that the network is designed allows for users to do this, right? And so I think that, you know, when you're doing a penetration test, you know, sometimes you have to step away from like the weeds of like looking at things from like a really deep dive technical level and just understand what does this project, what is this application, what's the goal of this company? And then with that in mind, understanding that, you can start to steer and adjust and find some really cool threads.
Great. Those are all really good points. I think a lot of times people overlook the fact too, and testers do this sometimes, they get too caught up in trying to get domain admin, enterprise admin, or root access when it's sometimes, well, actually all the time, it's the information that you're trying to protect that's important.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's funny you mentioned that. Literally, probably 3-4 weeks ago, the last assessment that I was on, straight into the file server, grabbed all of the data, like all of the intellectual property. And so in the report, it's like, this is enough to conclude the pen test. Like, real hackers don't care about DA. Like, APT crews don't jump into like organizations and sit on DA and then clap their hands, right? You sit there to go after the data. There's always an objective behind everything, you know, and I think that you hit a really good point there.
Okay. This next topic we got here is trends and the future of pen testing. So Dory, what do you think, what are your opinions of the trends and the future of pen testing?
Well, for a team like mine that's application focused, with all the things that are changing, I expect 5 years from now, we're going to be able to do the same amount of work with a third of the team, or we're going to do 3 times the amount of work with the team we have, just because of all of the different kind of ways that you can gate security in with DevSecOps and moving forward and building in a lot of the issues that you see on the outside, getting that fixed before it ever gets deployed. I also think that there's going to be different changes coming with data science and machine learning in ways that we can begin to test, even risk to determine if something needs to be tested by somebody like myself, or evaluating how likely it is that a certain asset maybe belongs to the company that I'm trying to defend. So I think a lot of things will become more automated. Maybe where the test, you're receiving more data and deciding what to do with it, deciding more on action than actually going out and collecting data. And also just certain classes of vulnerabilities, different frameworks are being put in place that should make those significantly less prevalent, and more testing along the pipeline as a project is moving forward should further eliminate additional things. So I think there'll be maybe more of a focus on very, very specific niche vulnerabilities and an ability to do a lot more with some of the time that we'll get back. I'm pretty excited about it. At least that's what I'm hoping.
Those are some very great thoughts there. Jack, what about you?
So my answer is pretty short and simple. I see more and more organizations paying attention to physical security, and I think that in the future there are definitely going to be there's definitely going to be more attention paid to physical penetration testing and the training of employees to recognize things like social engineering attempts, and better training for phishing attempts, and just general upgrades in that social area.
Great points. Mark, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that I'm a big DevSecOps guy, right? And so I think that the security posture is going to mature, right? And you're going to see a lot of automation and a lot of baseline, I don't want to use security posture again, but there's going to be a baseline point that's always going to get progressed, right? And like, I guess the best example to see this is like, a lot of times I'll do like DevSecOps consulting, and I'm speaking with the app, like the app team, right? Like the developers, like the ops guys. And basically, I start to kind of walk them through what I think are fundamental security controls that it's just me being like wrong, but like, I'm assuming that they don't know, And so like a lot of times the development team is very clear, and they already are aware of the risk that I'm about to bring to them. They've already mitigated it, right? I'm starting to notice that a lot of the developers already know a lot of the basic, like, or really just a lot of the really advanced security controls, right? And so I think that there's this big shift of like security education on the blue team side, right? And I don't want to say shift left, but like it really is shift left. Like developers in the beginning, they know about cross-site scripting. Like they know about, cross-site request forgery, and they know how to perform authorization and things like that, right? And so from the app perspective, I think that the baseline security posture is going to get a whole lot harder, right? And then on the other hand, from like the internal Active Directory and stuff like that, this lift and shift into the cloud. I'm also a big cloud guy, but the more that the responsibility gets shifted away from on-prem and to the cloud, right? It's going to get to the point where these assessments are like primarily cloud focused, and you're not really, I mean, you're going to have like legacy environments and stuff, and there's going to be on-prem organizations probably still for the next 20 years, but for some of the more, as we're talking the future of penetration testing, I think it's going to get to a point where you're not really testing the environment, right? You're almost like assessing the cloud environment against security best practices, and then you're really just testing like the deployment tools that are in place. You're testing REST APIs and microservices and stuff. It's going to be really, going to get really weird, you know. But at the same time, I think more to Dory's point, I do think that the capabilities of penetration testing and the security research community will always be like in lockstep, right? And so like for every advancement on the blue team side and the more DevSecOps that gets put in place and security being less than the in the SDLC, like penetration testers and the capabilities and automation and machine learning, all of that's going to enhance the penetration testing side as well. It's just going to be different. I don't know if that helps explain.
Very, very great points that you all brought up. Very good, interesting stuff. So that really, Mark, to add to what you and Dory were saying as far as application side and cloud. So that really would tell people that are, you know, that are pen testers that are more generalists, then they definitely need to learn more about cloud and learn more about development and web app pen testing. So it seems like a lot of that's going to be more useful as cloud gets more popular. And this next question here, this next topic is advice for aspiring pen testers. This could be red teamers, web application security, you name it. So Dory, what's your advice?
As you're getting started, I think probably the single most important thing that I did for my own career was finding a really good mentor. And then from there, finding a group, as you know, you guys are familiar with Dallas Hackers, great place to meet like-minded people. But I think in the beginning, just finding your people and specifically a mentor that's willing to take time. The mentor that I started out with, I didn't know much. And I say he taught me half of what I know and how to teach myself the rest. And so I think that's almost just irreplaceable as you go forward. And then beyond that, finding practical places to practice, keeping, you know, abreast of what's going on in industry, even just finding a good set of people to follow on Twitter so that you know like what's important and what's happening out there is all really, really good.
That's some great advice. Jack, what's your advice?
Absolutely. So I like what Dory said, finding a community, finding a tribe, finding mentors was a big part of my journey into this industry. You, Phil, and Wirefall and Tinkersec, all of you guys at Dallas Hackers Association were extremely supportive. I never had anybody tell me that I wasn't capable or that I wasn't going to make it. Everybody was so supportive. I read everything I could get my hands on. I watched all of the YouTube videos, the talks that I could get my hands on. And the other thing that I would recommend people do is not only like develop a network and build your knowledge set and your skill set as broadly as possible, but talk to people and tell people what you want to do, because eventually you're going to be talking to the right person who says, oh, really? Well, I'm looking for somebody to do just that. You know, can I have your contact information? And that could be your way into the career that you want to build.
That's great advice, and kind of add to what you said about being supportive. That definitely I'd recommend to people is stay away from anyone negative. If people aren't supporting your goals, they're being negative towards you, then you need to avoid those people, because it's tough enough to have the confidence, and you don't need anyone doing things to hinder that confidence. So those are some really great points.
Absolutely. And if I could build on that real quick, I'm sorry, Mark, I know it's your turn. we were talking before about, oh, Dory, what did you call it?
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome.
I
Thank
wanted
you.
to jump in with what you
Yeah,
said as
go
well and
for it.
say that
Go for
includes that includes yourself when you say don't listen to those
Yeah.
negative voices.
Yeah, absolutely. The imposter syndrome is real. I can be in a room full of people and feel like, oh gosh, like I am absolutely not worthy to be in this crowd. And but I know that even the best of the best in our industry have their moments of feeling just that way too. You are what you are, and you are capable of what you're capable of, and it is a wonderful thing because you worked hard for it.
Yeah, it's really good advice there. The imposter syndrome. I mean, I run into that as a teacher when I give my lectures. Sometimes I feel like the lectures weren't good enough. That I need to do something to improve on it. And then at the end of the class, unsolicited, someone to come up and compliment me on the lecture or say they got a lot from it. Sometimes we take for granted what we know because it's just everyday knowledge to us, and we don't realize that to someone else it means a lot. So yeah, that negative self-talk that's a good one to try to overcome. Mark, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So my input's definitely a combination of everything you guys have said, and I guess I'll try to tell them the story. I don't know how well this will go, right? And so my upbringing in the cybersecurity. So I had a mentor, right? I did a lot of time in Alabama. They did a lot of time. I'm not a big fan of that place. And so my mentor is called the Dead Cow, right? And so one of the guys from Close to the Dead Cow kind of picked me up at like 18, taught me the ropes, and he basically trained me for years, right? And so while I was getting trained by this guy and getting like trained under his mentors and his friends, and like I kind of stayed in a siloed bubble, right? And so where I was at, there wasn't really a big cybersecurity community, right? And also it was really just me, my mentor, and his mentors and his group, right? And so, you know, like you get taught like the old school ways and you hear about the old stories and stuff. And so for me, you hear these superhero level stories, right? And at the same time, you know, I'm kind of siloed and I'm looking at the InfoSec community following everybody, right? Like I remember before I had the chance to really meet Tinker, I remember like following him and I was like, who is this guy? Who is this guy? And then you meet him and you realize that he's normal. Like everybody is kind of in the same boat, right? Like everybody is just trying to be the best that they can, right? And so finding a mentor is critical. Yes, I definitely say it's absolutely critical. And I think that like being in a community is even more critical. Like I was able to like spread my wings and fly thanks to DHA, right? Thanks to everybody at DHA. And so, but even on top of that, like I think that maybe it's just my opinion. I do think that the penetration testing community can get a bit competitive, right? And it gets to the point where it's like, if I meet somebody, the first thing somebody wants to tell me is like the best hack they did, right? Or you immediately tell your best hacker story. And you know, it could be because of the underlying imposter syndrome where it's just, I want to boast, right? What my capabilities are, because I'm in a room full of people, or I'm in a community full of people who do the same thing as me. And so inherently, it's going to get competitive. Like if I play basketball and you play basketball and this other guy plays basketball, before you know it, someone's going to try to figure out who's better, right? And I think that like that doesn't help imposter syndrome, right? Like I think that just being comfortable in your skin, right, and just understanding the breadth of the landscape. Like there are people who, like for me, like I do web, right? I went through a phase where I was doing web and stuff, and then I started to hear about the SpectreOps team and PowerShell and Empire and stuff, and I was like, I have to learn all this. I have to go learn all this, or else I can't even consider myself a pen tester or red teamer. And then you hear about that, and then literally right when I was learning about Empire and how to do post-exploitation and things like that, I came across binary fuzzing. And so now I'm like, how am I going to keep up with the community if I don't know how to fuzz and do reverse engineering? And then you start to realize just how long those holes are, right? Like those rabbit holes go for years of experience in those specific fields. And so it's just be comfortable where you're at, right? Understand that everybody is in the same boat of like imposter syndrome. We're all trying to be better. And in that understanding, that's when you're like, just hug it out, man. everybody's cool. Like just show love, support everybody, right? And then like, you know, you'll be happier. But stay away from negative people and people who try to throw O-days in your face, because I don't know, it doesn't help people, especially juniors and stuff. They come out trying to get their feet wet, and then you hear some crazy, crazy story from a person who's your same age, and then you're like, I'll never be as good as that guy. And so, yeah, that's my spill on it.
100%. I didn't realize we were all DHA babies.
Yeah, I think everybody on the call is a DJ.
Awesome. They are such an incredible community. They've built up a bunch of us, so I'm really grateful for that.
It is, and a lot of things wouldn't be possible. Like my Pwn School project meetup, that wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for DHA. Just seeing what DHA started from. I was there at the very first meetings when you might have had, 20 people or so, and seeing it grow into some meetings up to like 200 people. So just seeing the possibilities and meeting people, like everyone's mentioned, the community is very important. I mean, community's helped all of us on this webinars careers. I mean, it's amazing. And it's really been cool to see what, others have done in their careers through the community. I know I wouldn't be doing half of what I'm doing if it wasn't for the community.
Yeah, I don't even think we'd even be on this call, because I met Dory at DHA. I met Tinker, who talked about you, Jack. So I met you through Tinker. And so it's like, yeah, DHA, you can almost say it's the reason why we're even on the call right now.
Yeah, I know I wouldn't be where I'm at right now if it were not for DHA, like for a fact. So you guys rock. I miss you very much.
We should get tattoos. Feeling it. Phil, are we doing it? Matching DHA tattoos.
You got to come back and
Matching DHA tattoos? Dude, I'm in.
Okay, we're down to this topic of the webinar that I like to call open mic. So this will just discuss anything that we haven't discussed that you think might be important to someone to hear. So Dory, we'll start with you.
Sure. So this kind of, I had the idea when I was listening to Mark talk at the past thing about I need this skill and I need this skill and I need this skill and I want to be better than this person and that person. And I've definitely been through all that. But the other thing is just sitting back and looking at what's needed. There is room for all of us, and there is room for each of us to bring up 10 more with us. Because if you look at all the things that are happening in the news and in the world and the way technology and society are going, we need more people that know this stuff. So I think there's just a huge opportunity in this field, and just how many people short they are. So I think it's just another idea of there's definitely room. If you like this stuff, then go after it, because there's plenty of places for everybody to land.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. Jack, what do you have to share?
Sure, along those same lines. Just support each other and be confident in yourself. If this is something you want to do, there's going to be a bit of stepping outside of your comfort zone. For a lot of people, that might be talking more, talking to other people more, doing more public speaking, which is not a favorite thing of mine to do, but I try to do it on a regular basis because it builds me up. It might be learning command line, and which is another personal example of that. I am not very technical, and I started off not technical at all, but I just took a SANS course, 560, and I passed the G-Pen. I can't believe it, but like I took a chance. I stepped outside my comfort zone and I did it. And thank you. And that's gonna, really, really help in my career. So if this is something you want to do, just jump in head first. Try the thing that doesn't seem possible at the moment, and you'll surprise yourself.
That's great, and congrats again. That's a great accomplishment and a good certification to have for pen testers. That's
great.
Thank you so much.
So Mark, what do you have to share with us?
So I would say that my closing remarks is like, never stop learning, right? Like we could throw that in the sky and be like, never stop learning. The reason why I say that is like, it doesn't stop, right? Like you're in an industry that's kind of your job is to keep up to date with technology from an offensive perspective, right? Technology is not going to stop, right? And so it's just, it's not so much like you get people who try to master topics, right? And by the time they master a topic, the topic is old, right? If you're the world's best COBOL person, you're still gonna get paid a lot now, right? But like you're the best at something that's now legacy, And when it comes to being a penetration tester, your job is to assess existing infrastructure. That is a constantly evolving ecosystem. And so it's really important to like stay curious and to like just enjoy the path, right? Just enjoy the fact that you're constantly learning, and stay thirsty, my friend. That was out of place, but it made me laugh.
I like it. Keep it.
That was some really great advice. The constantly keep learning. I totally agree with that. And one of the things people need to keep in mind too, one of the things if you're going to be a pen tester, work in any area of security, what you need to do is you can't learn everything. Try to learn as much as you can, but learn to research. There's going to come a point where you're not going to be able to learn everything there is. So if you know how to research and have a good base skill set of several different areas, then you can, if you have new areas to pen test come up, then it's easier to come up to speed with those areas.
Yeah, so I think that's super big, man. Like learning to not improv, yes, improv, right? Learning to like adopt on the fly, because you can't be expected to know everything about everything that you come across. So it's like a lot of it's just kind of being able to adapt and to adjust rapidly in the circumstance and come out with a win.
I totally agree. So this comes to the end of our webinar, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us. This has been a really great discussion, some really good food for thought, some really good stuff out there for anyone that's wanting to be a pen tester or wanting to know more about pen tests. So I thank you all for joining me today to be my guests, and I thank all of our listeners. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Phil.
Thanks so much, Phil. It was good to talk to you again. And you too.
Talk to you guys.
You too, guys.